Emily Sanders was the kind of daughter every parent thought they wanted. Intelligent and seemingly harmless, but behind her locked bedroom door, she was secretly planning a string of murders that would shock her family and the entire nation. Emily Sanders grew up in a neighborhood that people described as safe and peaceful. Her parents, Michael and Laura, had built a life that seemed picture perfect to outsiders. Their home was well kept, their routines stable, and their daughter was considered bright and responsible. From the outside, no one could imagine that this family carried a secret that would one day terrify the entire community. Emily was different from other teenagers, but in ways that were easy to dismiss at first. She was quiet, reserved, and preferred to spend her time alone. She avoided social gatherings, skipped parties, and rarely had friends over. Teachers described her as intelligent but emotionally distant, a student who excelled in academics but avoided any attention outside the classroom. For her parents, these traits seemed harmless. They believed she was simply shy, the kind of teenager who preferred books over crowds. The first hints that something was wrong came in subtle ways. Neighborhood pets started to go missing. Families put up flyers for their cats and dogs, desperate to find them, but no one had answers. Broken fences and disturbed gardens were brushed off as accidents or pranks by local kids. Michael and Laura heard the whispers at neighborhood meetings, but they never thought to connect them to their daughter. Why would they? To them, Emily was simply a little unusual, not dangerous. Still, there were moments that unsettled them. They noticed her locking her bedroom door more often, and her late-night walks became frequent. She would leave the house after dark and return hours later, claiming she needed fresh air or wanted to clear her mind. Michael once considered grounding her for these habits, but Laura dismissed it, insisting it was better to give their daughter space rather than create conflict. As time passed, the atmosphere around town grew tense. Stories of break-ins spread, and rumors of a prowler circulated. Families became cautious, locking doors earlier, keeping children close, and scanning the streets for strangers. The police assured residents they were investigating, but no suspect ever emerged. Meanwhile, Emily seemed unaffected by the fear gripping the neighborhood. Her behavior inside the house remained calm and detached, as though she were untouched by the tension others felt. Her parents occasionally questioned her indifference, but she always brushed off their concerns with short, rehearsed answers. It was easier to believe she was just a teenager lost in her own world than to accept the unease growing in their hearts. Despite these strange patterns, life at home appeared normal. Dinner was shared most evenings. School reports continued to show Emily's academic success, and family outings still happened on weekends. Yet beneath that surface, a quiet storm was forming. The Sanders household became a place where small alarms went unacknowledged, where warnings hid in plain sight. Michael and Laura ignored their instincts, convincing themselves they were imagining things. They wanted to believe their daughter was incapable of harm, and so they chose comfort over confrontation. What they did not realize was that the girl they tucked into bed each night was already leading a double life, and the truth about her would soon unravel in ways they could never prepare for. The turning point began one evening when the Sanders family sat down to watch the local news. What appeared on the screen was meant to be a brief update on a string of violent assaults that had shaken the nearby city. But for Michael and Laura, it became the beginning of a nightmare. The broadcast showed a grainy clip from a surveillance camera. A tall, slim figure was caught walking swiftly down a poorly lit street, not far from one of the crime scenes. The image was blurred, the features difficult to make out, but the way the person moved sent a shiver through the parents. Something about the posture, the stride, even the tilt of the head reminded them of Emily. They tried to dismiss the thought immediately. It felt unthinkable, even cruel, to imagine their daughter connected to such acts. Yet the suspicion lingered like a shadow that would not fade. Over the following days, more reports surfaced. Police were piecing together a timeline of events, linking assaults and disappearances that had baffled investigators for months. The same individual appeared in several pieces of footage, sometimes in the background, other times caught more clearly, but always just elusive enough to prevent a positive identification. Still, Michael and Laura could not ignore the similarities. Emily's late-night walks, her unexplained absences, and her growing disinterest in family activities seemed to align too closely with the times of the reported incidents. Every coincidence weighed heavier on their minds. At first, they tried to rationalize. They reminded themselves that Emily was an excellent student, someone who had never caused trouble at school or in the neighborhood. She had no history of violence, no reason to commit such acts. But as denial gave way to fear, small memories resurfaced with sharper clarity. Laura recalled finding scratches on Emily's arms and being told they were from the family S-cat, even though the marks looked far too deep. Michael remembered walking past her room late one night and hearing the sound of typing, followed by hurried shuffling when he knocked. These once insignificant moments now seemed like puzzle pieces fitting into a much darker picture. The tension inside the house grew quietly but steadily. Emily carried on as though nothing had changed, attending school, locking herself in her room, and keeping her emotions hidden behind a calm expression. Her parents, on the other hand, became consumed by unease. They whispered about their suspicions late at night, questioning whether they were imagining things or uncovering something real. Every creak in the house, every sound of the front door opening after midnight, felt like confirmation of their deepest fears. As more neighborhoods reported strange activity, the authorities intensified their search. They urged citizens to remain vigilant, reminding everyone that the perpetrator was likely hiding in plain sight. That phrase haunted Michael and Laura. It suggested that the person they feared was not a faceless stranger, but someone within the community, someone trusted, someone close. The parents found themselves looking at Emily differently, watching her every move while trying not to reveal their suspicions. They desperately wanted to be wrong, but in their hearts, a terrifying thought began to take root. Their daughter might not just be hiding secrets, she could be the very person everyone was searching for. The discovery came in the most ordinary of ways. Michael had been cleaning Emily's room one Saturday afternoon, a task she usually resisted by insisting she would handle it herself. She had gone to stay with a friend for the weekend, or so she claimed, and he took the rare opportunity to tidy up. As he pulled out the storage box from under her bed, something caught his eye. A worn notebook, its black cover plain, but oddly heavy in his hands. At first, he thought it might be filled with school notes or sketches, but when he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. The pages were covered with neat, meticulous writing. Each entry was dated and described with unsettling precision. They were not diary entries about everyday teenage life. They were accounts of crimes. The notes described movements of strangers, patterns of routines, and vulnerabilities of chosen targets. Some pages mapped out locations with directions scrawled in the margins. There were times of night written with exact minutes noted, followed by chilling observations such as how long it took for a light to turn off inside a house, or the number of steps from a front porch to a back gate. Flipping further, Michael saw descriptions of actual incidents that had made headlines. The details were too specific, too accurate to be anything but first-hand accounts. His heart pounded as he realized that these weren't fictional musings or some sort of imagination exercise. Emily had been documenting her crimes as if she were cataloging experiments in a science project. When Laura saw the notebook, her reaction was immediate. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, her face draining of color. They both sat in silence, unable to deny the truth, staring back at them. There were symbols, perhaps her way of marking successes, along with eerie notes that hinted at her lack of remorse. She wrote about fear in a detached tone, describing how it looked in her victim's eyes, how silence filled the air afterward, how quickly she could disappear before anyone noticed. The words were cold, analytical, and completely devoid of empathy. Among the pages was something that terrified them even more. Future plans. Certain dates had yet to arrive, and names, possibly pseudonyms, were listed beside them. There were sketches of streets not far from their own neighborhood, places the family knew well. The realization that their daughter had not only committed terrible acts, but was actively planning more left them paralyzed. They debated whether to call the police immediately or confront her directly, but fear clouded their judgment. What if they were wrong? What if this notebook, disturbing as it was, somehow didn't mean what they thought? Yet deep down they knew. Every strange behavior, every unanswered question was finally explained in these pages. That night, they barely slept. The house felt different, heavier, as if every corner carried a hidden danger. Emily returned the next morning, moving about the home casually, unaware that her most guarded secret had been uncovered. Her parents watched her closely, their minds torn between love and horror. Knowing that the person they had raised was no longer just their daughter, she was something far more dangerous, and the truth could not stay hidden much longer. The decision to involve the authorities did not come easily. Michael and Laura spent days torn apart by fear, guilt, and disbelief. Each time Emily walked through the house, each time she sat quietly at the dinner table or retreated to her locked room, they saw the notebook's words playing in their minds. They felt as if they were living with a stranger, wearing their daughter's face. The risk of doing nothing weighed on them more heavily with each passing moment. The notebook was not just a confession, it was a warning of what was to come. They finally gathered the courage to hand it over to the police, trembling as they explained what they had found. The officers listened carefully, skeptical at first, until they turned the pages themselves and recognized the descriptions that matched unsolved cases. What Michael and Laura had uncovered was no misunderstanding. Their daughter was at the center of something much larger and far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. Investigators moved swiftly, knowing the danger of hesitation. A search warrant was issued for Emily's room, and what they found left even hardened detectives shaken. Hidden compartments beneath floorboards and false panels. Inside her closet contained items that linked her directly to multiple crime scenes. There were gloves, tools marked with stains, personal objects that had once belonged to victims, and even digital drives filled with carefully stored files. Each document revealed her obsession with control names, routines, photographs of strangers taken without their knowledge. The chilling level of detail suggested she had been preparing and perfecting her methods for far longer than anyone had suspected. As the evidence piled up, one truth became undeniable. Emily had been leading a double life with alarming success. By day, she was a quiet student who kept to herself, admired by teachers for her discipline and focus. By night, she transformed into a predator, slipping through the darkness, following carefully constructed plans, and recording her actions with eerie pride. What unsettled investigators most was how methodical she had been. Nothing was impulsive. Every crime was designed, mapped, and rehearsed until success was almost guaranteed. When the raid concluded, there was one glaring absence: Emily herself. She had anticipated the intrusion. By the time police entered her room, she was gone. No one could say when she had left or how she had learned of their approach, but it was clear she had prepared for the possibility. In her absence, the Sanders home became a spectacle. Media vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions, and neighbors stared with shock and suspicion. Michael and Laura, once respected as a wholesome couple, raising a gifted child, now faced relentless scrutiny. They were portrayed as enablers, accused of ignoring signs that others claimed they should have seen. Their grief was compounded by shame, as though they had become prisoners in their own home, haunted by the betrayal of their daughter and the judgment of the world. Meanwhile, the search for Emily intensified. Alerts were issued across state lines, and her face appeared on every news channel. Yet, the girl who had fooled her own parents had no trouble disappearing into the world beyond her hometown. She had erased herself carefully, leaving investigators chasing a shadow. Every day she remained free brought the possibility of another tragedy, and the weight of that possibility pressed down hardest on the people who once thought they knew her best. Emily was finally found weeks later, hundreds of miles away, living under a false name in a quiet coastal town. She had cut her hair short, changed her appearance, and blended into her new environment with the same precision that had defined all her actions. When police officers closed in on the small apartment she had been renting, they expected a struggle. But instead, they found her sitting calmly at a table, a half-written page before her, as though she had been waiting. There was no resistance, no panic. She simply allowed herself to be led away, her expression as composed and detached as it had always been. To the investigators, it was as though she viewed the entire situation not as the end of her freedom, but as another event to observe and record. The trial that followed gripped the nation. Every headline bore Emily's name, and every broadcast dissected her actions, her motives, and her hidden life. The courtroom was filled daily with reporters, neighbors, and families of victims desperate for answers. Emily sat at the defense table with the same unnerving calm she had shown during her arrest. Testimonies from forensic experts revealed the scale of her crimes. multiple victims across different towns, meticulously documented in her notebook and digital files. There were no signs of remorse in her writings or her demeanor. Even as photographs of crime scenes were shown and victims' families spoke through tears, she remained cold, her gaze steady, her emotions locked away. For her parents, the ordeal was unbearable. Michael and Laura attended the sessions with faces pale and weary, often sitting silently as the evidence was presented. They listened as prosecutors described how their daughter had built her double life, how she had deceived them so completely, and how she had continued her crimes under their very roof. The guilt weighed on them heavily. Every time they heard the word missed signs, they thought back to the nights she slipped away, the scratches they had overlooked, the excuses they had accepted without question. They were torn between the love they still felt for their child and the horror of knowing what she had done. Public opinion was divided. Some people blamed the parents, accusing them of turning a blind eye to the truth. Others saw Emily as a manipulator, someone who had concealed her true self so effectively that no ordinary parent could have known. As the trial progressed, experts debated whether she was driven by mental illness or simply by an unfathomable desire for control. In the end, the jury found her guilty on multiple counts, and her sentence ensured she would never walk free again. Even with her conviction, the questions remained. Why had she done it? How had she managed to hide her actions for so long? What could have stopped her sooner? For Michael and Laura, there were no clear answers. Only the haunting reality that the daughter they once tucked into bed was the same person who had terrorized countless lives. They left the courthouse with their world shattered, carrying the unbearable truth that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are not strangers in the dark, but family members hiding in plain sight.